You know, there's a special kind of panic when a man who thinks he's an emperor discovers that he actually has to follow the law.
And yesterday, we watched that meltdown happen in real time, live on television.
The U.S. Supreme Court just stripped Donald Trump of his favorite economic weapon. They told him, no, you're not an emperor of tariffs. Then they struck down a giant chunk of his so-called emergency duties, and he responded by going in front of the cameras and basically shouting, I can destroy an entire country, but I can't charge them $1?
And here's the wild part. While he's melting down about losing his favorite economic weapon, Canada just quietly gained leverage in the next round of CUSMA talks. Again.
So today, we're breaking down the end of the one-man trade dictatorship. We're looking at the plan B that he's already launching, and why Canada just gained massive leverage in the CUSMA wars. His fentanyl tax is dead. The Constitution just bit back, and for once, Canada is holding the high ground. The 35% tax that would have bankrupted our industries, well, it's legally dead.
Okay, quick rewind, Dave. Trump's big genius idea last year was to use something called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the IEEPA, to slap massive tariffs on other countries. That law was supposed to be for national emergencies, sanctions, freezing assets, the stuff when there's a war, not the I'm annoyed with Canada again act.
So what does he do? Well, he declared a fentanyl emergency at the northern border and used that to whack Canada with a 35% tariff on basically everything that wasn't nailed down. The problem? There wasn't a fentanyl emergency coming from Canada. We're a tiny fraction of the supply. Most of the fentanyl the U.S. seizes is caught at its own southern border and inside the country, not coming down from us. This was a loophole he used as a shakedown.
So he wrapped it in drug war language, but it was never really about fentanyl at all. It was about creating a legal excuse to tax allies and call it an emergency. And even inside that fake emergency, the fine print had to admit reality. CUSMA still exists, and the North American economy is still glued together.
So he had to carve out goods that move under CUSMA, the Canada-US-Mexico trade deal. In practice, more than 90% of Canadian exports still slip through tariff-free. But the threat was always there. If he walked away from CUSMA, that 35% hammer could have landed on most of our exports overnight. So fast forward to this week, and the Supreme Court looks at IEEPA, looks at what Trump did, and basically says, tariffs are taxes. Taxes belong to Congress. You don't get to make them up just to fit your improvisation.
The vote was 6-3, not even close. And those swing votes, they weren't liberals, they were conservatives, including two of Trump's own nominees, Neil Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett.
The court's message was simple. If Congress wanted to grant a president the power to swing around unlimited tariffs, it would say so clearly. And IEEPA does not say that.
Which means the whole emergency tariff scheme, illegal. Those duties based on that law, gone. The legal pillar he'd been leaning on, sawed off.
Now, let's talk about Canada, because this is where it actually gets interesting. First, the obvious. This ruling does not magically erase every tariff hurting Canadian workers. The sectoral ones, steel, aluminum, autos, lumber, and some copper, they're still there. Those are under a different law called Section 232.
So how did Section 232 sneak through? Well, it's a Cold War-era law from 1962 that lets the president hit imports if the Commerce Department says they're a threat to national security.
And that's the loophole that he drove a truck through. He ordered so-called security investigations into steel, aluminum, autos, even other sectors, then used those findings to slap targeted tariffs on specific products from around the world, including Canada.
And that's how you ended up with Canadian steel and aluminum suddenly branded as a security risk to the United States. Well, we're literally in NORAD defending their airspace together. You couldn't make this up.
So legally, Section 232 is a different animal from the emergency powers law that the Supreme Court just killed. Congress wrote it to specifically give presidents room on security and defense, so the court didn't touch those tariffs in this case.
And that's why they're still allowed. The justices said you can't use an emergency law meant for sanctions as a backdoor to unlimited tariffs. but Section 232 already came pre-approved by Congress as a tariff tool.
So even after today's ruling, those sectoral tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, autos, and lumber are still biting. They're not collateral damage, they are the point, a deliberate strategy to surgically hit industries and scare off investment.
Unfortunately, if you work in a steel mill in Hamilton or an auto plant in Windsor, this doesn't suddenly fix everything. But here's what has changed. Trump can no longer threaten to use the IEEPA to slap that 35% tariff on everything if he storms out of CUSMA.
And that matters a lot because CUSMA is up for review later this year. And up to now, the unspoken threat was, hey, nice little trade agreement you've got there, Canada. Be a shame if I tore it up and hit you with a 35% emergency tax on everything. Now, the Supreme Court has basically said no, you can't use that emergency law as a backdoor to rewrite trade policy on your own.
For Canada, that means the nightmare scenario. Trump walks away from CUSMA and then slaps a 35% shock tax on almost all of our exports. Well, that is now off the table. So how do we fight back against the sector stuff? The autos, the steel, the aluminum, the lumber. Well, you don't beat that with one court case, you beat it with leverage.
And part of that is the CUSMA review itself. If Trump wants any kind of stable deal, Canada and Mexico have made it very clear. They want a trilateral agreement, and they're working together. Those steel, auto, and aluminum tariffs, they gotta go.
And part of it is surgical counter-tariffs. Hit products and states that have political weight in Washington, and suddenly governors and senators, they start caring a lot more about Canadian steel than they did last week.
And part of it is diversification as well. The more we sell cars, batteries, grain, and critical minerals to Europe, Asia, and Mexico, the less any U.S. president can hold us hostage with a tariff tweet. If they want to be an unreliable buyer, fine. We'll make them one of many, but not our only option. And that is what Carney's government has been focusing on all year long.
Inside Canada, it's also about keeping those sectors alive long enough to see a better policy. That means real transition plans, support for our workers, and investment to keep plants modern so that when the tariffs finally come off, we're still in the game.
But here's the other thing that's changed since the last time Canada had to stare down a U.S. president over trade. Our bench. Mark Carney just named Janice Charette as Canada's new chief trade negotiator to the United States. She's not a random political appointee. She's a career public servant with 40 years in the system, twice clerk of the Privy Council, former High Commissioner to the UK, and now the point person for the CUSMA review.
In plain language, her entire job is how to understand how Washington works, where the pressure points are, and how to protect Canadian workers when Trump starts waving tariffs around like confetti.
And she's not walking in alone. You've got Charette on the trade side, Mark Wiseman as the new ambassador in Washington, and Dominic LeBlanc running Canada-US file from cabinet. That's an actual strategy, not a hope that Trump likes us this week.
The emergency trick is gone, but the sector weapons are still on the table, and that's where Canada has to push back.
It also lands at a time when resistance is building inside the U.S. system itself. Last week, the House of Representatives passed a resolution to repeal Trump's tariffs on Canada. 6 Republicans crossed the aisle to vote with Democrats.
So think about that. You've got Congress rebuking his tariffs. You got the Supreme Court rebuking his use of emergency powers. And you've got business groups begging for stability. That is finally seeing checks and balances in real time. It's not perfect, and it's not even close to what should be happening in the USA, but for once, it's working in the right direction.
Of course, though, this is Donald Trump. And when one door closes, he runs through a wall. Within hours of losing at the Supreme Court, he announces a new Plan B, a 10% global tariff under a different law, Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. You can practically hear the Project 2025 crowd high-fiving in the background. These people have spent years combing through old laws looking for loopholes a president can weaponize, and now they've landed on Section 122 as the next toy.
Section 122 lets a president slap temporary tariffs if they claim there's a balance of payments problem. But it's not the blank check that Trump thought he had under the emergency law.
For starters, there's a hard cap. 15% maximum. Not 35, not 40, not whatever number pops into his head mid-speech.
5,000%. And then there's a clock. This new 10% tariff kicks in on Tuesday, and it runs for 150 days. And then it dies unless Congress votes to keep it going.
Which means every senator and representative now has to decide if they really want to go into an election defending a tax that raises prices for their own voters, which is exactly what tariffs do.
And this is why you've got U.S. governors literally sending Trump invoices for what these tariffs have cost their states, demanding refunds. It's why the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is begging for a reset of tariff policy, saying consumers should be paid back and that this whole experience has been a drag on growth.
So where does that leave us? Well, we're still dealing with the sector-specific tariffs, facing a new 10% tariff that could catch some edges of our economy, but not facing a 35% doomsday tax if CUSMA talks go sideways.
And even if the global part is mostly branding, the fine print already exempts a long list of goods. Passenger vehicles, some emergency products, key pharmaceuticals, fertilizers, beef, tomatoes, oranges, electronics.
Plus, once again, most Canadian and Mexican exports that are CUSMA compliant are carved out. So he's yelling about a huge new tariff wall, but our biggest shipments are still mostly shielded by the trade deal. The real damage is the ongoing uncertainty and the pressure on the sectors that are still exposed.
And for us Canadians, it's why so many people keep repeating the same phrase: diversify, diversify, diversify. Deeper links with Mexico, bigger deals with Europe, Asia, and the UAE, China, and India. More redundancy so that when Washington goes on one of those adventures, we're not left holding the bag.
The ruling actually helps there too, because it removes some of the wild card fear. You can't have a president just wake up, declare an emergency, and unilaterally slap a giant tax on the entire world anymore. Not with that law anyway.
And speaking of Trump, what does he do when the highest court in the country tells him you exceeded your authority? Well, if it were a normal president, you'd accept the ruling, you'd pivot, and maybe you'd even pretend that this was your plan all along.
But if it's Donald Trump, well, you go in front of cameras and deliver a rambling monologue that sounds like a late-night sketch that no writer would ever dare pitch.
He literally stood there insisting that under his ruling he can, and I quote, destroy the trade, destroy the country, impose an embargo, and do anything he wants. But he can't charge a dollar.
That's a man turning the highest office on earth into a second-rate reality show. And the worst part is, it's not even entertainment. It's people's jobs, mortgages, and paychecks on the line, while he treats trade like a ranting stunt.
He raged at the 6 justices who ruled against him, and he called them a disgrace, fools, lapdogs, unpatriotic, and disloyal.
He appointed some of these people. They read the law. They reminded him that Congress controls tariffs, and his response was basically, "How dare you obey the Constitution I swore to uphold?"
If that doesn't scream, I'm above the law, and I'm a king, I'm a dictator, well, I don't know what does. One moment he's trying to sound strong, and the next he's veering off into complaints about pennies, saying he'd have used 1 penny. But they don't make pennies anymore. You can't buy anything with a penny, so he used $1 instead.
You know when someone's rehearsed their outrage in the mirror and then they get to the real event and it all comes out in one long tangled sentence? Well, that's what this press conference was. So we want to know what you think. Let us know in the comments. Is this a turning point or just one good day in a long, messy fight over trade and Powell?
And if you found this helpful, hit like and make sure you're subscribed and ring that bell so you don't miss when we break down the next twist in this ongoing saga.
Because you know there's going to be more. And if you want to go deeper, join the A-Team for our members-only breakdowns and hop on our Substack where we've got all the links, charts, and sources in one place.
And a lot of you have been asking about our t-shirts. Well, you can find the links to that in our merch store below and get your own Canada Pride.
Thanks everyone for watching, and good luck to Canada in the game tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, everyone.
Ciao for now.